thank you all for coming. Good afternoon. I'm Derrick Pratt, our Director of Education and Public Programming here at the Erie Canal Museum. I don't respect our speaker nearly as much as I usually do, so this will be a more informal intro. The impact of the Erie Canal has been immense, socially, politically, and economically, and artistically. The canal transformed a lot of things about America and New York, and we're going to see kind of an interesting intersection, if you will, today of how art and politics combined in the late 19th century. Should be an interesting talk, at least I think it should be. Hopefully you'll agree with me. I will be the speaker today. I should also get all this stuff out of you guys' way. Hello, Penfield. Sorry, forgot about that. Anyway, this is our 7th lunchtime lecture of 2023 with our theme of the year being art. Our next lunchtime lecture is August 17th. That will also be hybrid, so virtual and in-person, featuring canal historian Pamela Vittorio. Her temporary exhibition is on display downstairs at the moment in the Link Gallery, and she will be presenting Colors on the Water, artists' depictions of the New York State canals from 1825 to 1900. We encourage you to register for that talk as well. Should be pretty interesting. You can also, of course, sign up for our annual Lunchtime Lecture Pass. It takes away all the hassle of registering for stuff. You get all the Zoom links, whether you're in person or away, and you get a recording of the talk, of all of the talks, in fact. So there's Lunchtime Lectures. Also today, later today, we have our Beers, Bikes, and Barges cycling tour at 6 p.m. in Canastota. We still have spots open on that if anyone wants to register. Next week on the 27th, we'll be out in Schuylerville on the Champlain Canal doing that. And on August 10th, out in Weedsport with the Canal Society of New York. So if we have any cyclists in the crowd on Zoom today, please register. Then finally, this is my last announcement. On August 8th at 7 p.m., we will be hosting Dan J. Royal, who is the author of the incredible new book, Borderland Blacks, which looks at the relationship between Rochester and St. Catharines, Ontario, two canal towns on opposite sides of the U.S.-Canadian border during the era of the abolition movement and the Underground Railroad. So that should be really interesting. That's one of our deeper dive lectures. It'll be right here at 7 p.m. There will also be Zoom link and recording available as well to everyone who registers. So now on to the main show, though. The reason you're all here. That painting right over there. Don't worry, on Zoom you'll get to see it in a second. A painting of just a man and a horse. Usually, if you're here at the museum, you can see it by the bathrooms. Yes, we'll actually get into why it's there a little bit. And why it's there kind of dates back to 2021, how I first came across this painting in the museum. At the time, I was the museum's, oops, let me just check her. Okay. At the time, in 2021, I was the museum's interim curator. We were going through a transition at that point in time. And one of the earliest jobs I had when I was interim curator was the New York State Museum had on loan from us for their large Erie Canal bicentennial exhibit, this mule barn wall that we see here, an incredible artifact, but it's also incredibly big. It's a wall, so we had to find a good amount of space for it. And really the only wall that could fit it, that I wouldn't have to do tremendous amounts of work to put it on, was the one right over there by the bathrooms. Also, you know, it fit fairly well into the motif that we have on the upstairs here of a sort of canal town. But we've had to take down a few paintings, so there was a lot of empty space on that wall. So I figured we needed to fill a bit more of that, and being a good curator I was, I said, hey, we should make it, you know, thematically make sense to this wall, what goes next to it. So I started looking through the collection for some more paintings of horses. Am I not loud enough?
The audience is complaining about volume.
Yes, well, I'll try to get closer and yell. Sure.
Hi, everyone.
Hello. Doesn't get much closer than that. Ugh. Our bad, folks. Hopefully you can hear me better now. I will talk as loudly and clearly as possible. Anyway, there I was, looking through our collections, trying to find something to match up with this wall. Eventually I found like 2 or 3 different paintings in our collection of a mule driver, or someone driving a team of horses or mules on the canal. And I was up in the air over which one to get. Oh, okay. But I settled on this one. I thought it was a fairly good painting. I really liked the horses, and you know, it thematically fit. You know, we had this mule barn wall that had been inscribed by various canal drivers. So let's, you know, depict what drivers look like. So we ended up with this. But I started to notice that there were a number of kind of odd details to the painting that seemed a bit off. There was also a small tag on the back that explained a bit more context that also sent me looking more into this painting to discover the story that it might tell. So let's look at a few of those odd details. The first one that you might notice is the driver himself. Pretty well dressed for someone walking 12 hours a day between Albany and Buffalo, right? There's kind of the stereotypical canal driver is not wearing shoes, for one, because they wear out just from walking that much. And is generally a young boy as well, is typically thought of as kind of your prototypical canal driver of relatively little means. So that was kind of suspicious. Also, it seems like the painter really only focused on those horses and this man. There are a lot of really crudely painted elements to pretty much the rest of the painting. I think kind of one of the most obvious examples are the telegraph lines. The perspective is just really weird on these. If you look at the boat, I mean, the boat's smaller than the horses. So like there's some odd elements there. Seems like those weren't kind of the focus of the painting. But then the crucial clue in this painting about what the painting was, it looks like you have something you need to tell me.
No, I don't need to tell you.
Okay.
Sorry.
Was this. You kind of can't fully see it here, but it says, on the bank of the Erie Canal, G.W. Aldridge, superintendent, right, of canals. So there's our big clue. First big question to ask, who is G.W. Aldridge? Zoom won't let any of you see anything I've set up. Who is G.W. Aldridge? Well, here's a picture of G.W. Aldridge. G.W. is short for George Washington. He is George Washington Aldridge II, born December 28, 1856 in Michigan City, Indiana. But he didn't live there for too long, and his family, so his mother, Virginia, and father, see his name's George Washington Aldridge II, George Washington Aldridge I, moved to Rochester. And in fact, his father will be elected the 38th. Actually, he is not elected, I believe. Ends up the previous mayor of Rochester resigns. He becomes the mayor of the 38th mayor of Rochester for a brief 1-year period. He is mayor. He serves as mayor as a Republican, which will be important throughout this as well. His father, pretty prominent person politically in Rochester. We'll see he is also prominent business-wise in Rochester as well. G.W. Aldridge leads a pretty privileged life for a guy in growing up in the 1860s. He will attend 2 pretty fancy schools, from what I can tell. The Carey Collegiate Seminary in Oakfield, which is just to the south of Rochester. There's a number of notable Rochesterians who attend this school, who he probably gets acquainted with, and including a future congressman from Rochester, Charles S. Baker, who is a fellow Republican. I'm sure they worked closely together, as we will see later. And then he attended the DeGraff Military Institute in Rochester. So he's doing all the things that an upper middle class to just upper class boy would be expected to do, kind of learning how to take over kind of his father's shoes, fill his shoes, there we go, and advance socially, if you will. And the next step on that journey is he will begin working for his father's large contracting firm. This is important to note. G.W. Aldridge gets his start career-wise as a contractor, largely doing buildings in Rochester. His father had already worked the firm into one of the primary contracting firms in Rochester. George Washington II starts out kind of working on that. And when his father dies in 1877, he will step right into his father's shoes and inherit business. I really enjoy this description of Aldridge taking over the business from a Rochester biography that was written in the 1890s on her. It says, quote, possessed of great energy, a will that enabled him to overcome serious obstacles, coupled with a faculty for concentration of thought, quickness of action, determination to accomplish any settled purpose, he soon mastered his father's business. And on the death of the latter in 1877, he won his way into position among the leading contractors of the city. I just enjoy that. We get the fun self-made myth for George Washington Aldridge. His father had already developed this into the city's largest contracting firm, but through his grit and determination, he won that top spot again, which I enjoy how that's presented. But he, I'm sure did have a lot of these faculties because he does remain a top contractor in the city. He just, got a small $1 million loan from his father to start it all off, right? He becomes a noted contractor. Contracting is an important job at this time, as it still is today. But at the time, it was a good way to get into politics for a number of reasons. One, you're building, you see a lot today still, land developers often are pretty politically connected folks. If you're a contractor, you're working with a lot of kind of the rich and powerful in town, building large buildings that only people with a lot of capital can finance in general. And you also have a fairly large workforce that kind of depends on you for a living. So they also have an interest in making sure you do pretty well, making sure you keep getting those contracts as a contractor. So maybe they'll vote for you in political office. And that's exactly what we see. In 1883, George Washington Aldridge will enter politics, being elected to Rochester's executive board, where he serves 4 terms, largely under the mayorship of Cornelius R. Parsons, then the longest serving mayor of Rochester at that time, also the owner of one of the city's largest lumber mills. So again, you can see these connections that are formed amongst all of these sort of political elites, especially in the building trades, which is going to be a theme throughout this talk. Should, again, I don't think I mentioned it before, George Washington Aldrich follows in the footsteps of his father and joins the Republican Party. And he is going to be a major player in that party for his whole life. In fact, he gains a significant following within the Rochester and Monroe County area, Western New York, really, Republican Party, becoming one of its most influential members. And eventually, he is elected the 43rd mayor of Rochester in 1894. And by this point, he has built up a considerable political machine, which we'll get into in a little bit, through his contracting contacts. Ooh, that's a fun word. On this kind of decade he spends, what am I trying to say, on the executive council, he builds up a lot of power. It seems like he was Cornelius R. Parsons' sort of protege at this time, developing the political connections he needed to succeed. So he gets elected mayor of Rochester. This is the highest elected office he will ever attain. Pretty much as soon as he's elected mayor of Rochester, he is angling to stop being mayor of Rochester. It is fairly small potatoes overall. I mean, the mayor of Rochester has important connections, important roles, important, especially patronage abilities as head of the executive branch of Rochester. But Aldrich wants more. He wants a position with the state government, which is significantly larger and more lucrative than Rochester itself. In the 1894 Saratoga Springs Republican Convention for the state, he will angle to try to get himself nominated lieutenant governor. However, he receives a few votes for that, but he is beaten by Wayne County resident Thomas Saxton of Lyons, I believe it is. However, that ticket with Saxton as lieutenant governor and former vice president under Benjamin Harrison, Levi P. Morton, they will win the governor's seat with no doubt the help of Aldrich whipping up the votes in Western New York for the Morton-Saxton ticket. So when you have a guy help you out like that, and who is incredibly powerful within your own party, usually you have to help those guys out. In 1895, less than a year after becoming mayor of Rochester, Governor Morton appoints George Washington Aldrich superintendent of public works. As it said in the painting, well, he's called superintendent of canals, but the Department of Public Works runs the canals, and we will now get into how that happened. And we've already been talking a lot about it, but I think now we need to dive a bit deeper in what I mean by patronage politics. So let's look at the wild and wonderful world of the spoil system and political patronage. Here's one of the most famous political cartoons about it. And we'll get to that. So patronage in politics is incredibly old. Famously, the Roman Republic had this a lot. You would provide people with food, money, jobs, etc. In exchange, they vote for you. Pretty easy, back and forth there, right? I think we can all kind of grasp that. And to some extent or another, it's been practiced in America for pretty much ever since the American Revolution. There has been this sort of horse trading for votes. Even early republic, when they have this highfalutin rhetoric about, like meritocracy and stuff, there's also just, hey, you vote for me, you're going to get a job, right? The Federalists famously do this with John Adams, appointing at the very end of Adams's term, before the opposing Jeffersonians take over, just a whole bunch of judges who have appointments for life. Yeah, so you've got Federalists being helped out. Anyway, political patronage, though, it's still getting its legs under it in the early American Republic. It's that first generation of people born in America that are really going to perfect it, especially here in New York. A man who will eventually become president, Martin Van Buren, is kind of one of the pioneers of utilizing what's called the spoils system to gain and retain political power. Van Buren starts out, he's a lawyer in the Hudson Valley, becomes a state senator, and he actually initially opposes the Erie Canal, but he's a great politician. He eventually changes his support to being in favor of the canal, making it seem like he was the savior of the canal instead of a villain of it. And then he can see this canal system, owned and operated by New York State. There's a lot of jobs. The building we're standing in here, the Syracuse Waylock building, I mean, this building itself employs between, I'd say, 8 to 20 people inside of it at any one time. All of them appointed by the state. There are not civil service tests yet, and we see a regular kind of rotating through of people working here pretty much whenever there's a new statewide election, or at least new administration coming in. Van Buren also recognizes that he can make this work a lot better. In 1821, New York State gets a new constitution where Van Buren and his allies, called the Bucktails, because they would wear these bucktails on their hats. They're kind of the early prototype in a lot of ways of the more infamous Tammany Hall. They work this convention to perfection. And after 1821, you see the establishment of what's called the Albany Regency, which is Van Buren and his allies will control New York State for the next 20 years under the newly formed Democratic Party. Van Buren, what he's doing in New York State attracts a lot of attention in this growing Democratic Party in general throughout the country. And Van Buren attaches his star to the man depicted here, Andrew Jackson. And Jackson's government will become particularly notorious for the new ways it will, the more brazen, perhaps, ways it will do political patronage. This is when the spoil system really gets its name of the spoil system. And in fact, is named after a quote from New York's Senator William Marcy of Mountain fame, right? That Mount Marcy, where Marcy says, what's written right here, to the victor go the spoils. And after that, the spoil system sticks. Essentially, it means you win an election, you get all the lucrative jobs, what were called at the time plums. We still have that expression today, right? Plum jobs. That's what these are. They're political plums, right for the picking. And you give them out to your allies. And on the hope that they will vote for you. And this is so effective in New York, machine politics. So that's what these systems of patronage come to be known as, machines, because it doesn't always matter who's in charge. There's this inevitable inertia just going along with it almost that keeps propelling these parties and these party systems forward. And so these political machines set up across the country, and one of their favorite ways two of their favorite ways to keep expanding the spoil system is to increase the size of state bureaucracies and to increase state spending, especially on major infrastructure projects like the Erie Canal. They saw what New York and Bart Van Buren were able to do. And you have, after the canal opens, what is called the era of canal mania in New York. Every state is building canals, and in almost every state, you've got these political machines growing around these patronage networks. And in fact, becomes so bad, really, and people in New York start to realize that, you know, if you are in charge of the New York State canals, you have tons of power, right? And at first, canal commissioners, who do most of the actual appointing, it's a lifetime term. Well, when so, you know, because the Albany Regency has been in charge for so long, when the Whigs come in, the opposing political party to Van Buren's Democrats, you know, they want to slice the action too, but you've got these guys with lifetime appointments. So on May 6, 1844, the New York State Legislature will change canal commissioner to an elected position of 4 years in kind of a first attempt to reform this system. Any guesses on if it works? No, not really. People just find new ways to do political patronage. You know, actually, you get even more turnover because, you know, now Whigs win the election one year, they're appointing all Whigs. Democrats win those 4-year terms, you know, 2 years later, and they're appointing all Democrats. That sort of thing. Patronage will run rampant at all levels of government. And you can see that in a lot of reports of ballooning costs for state expenditures, especially on the canal. There's famously, it costs $7.5 million. It takes 8 years to build the first Erie Canal. When they enlarge it to 70 feet wide and 7 feet deep, it takes over 30 years, and the cost is, I know it's definitely double digits, millions of dollars somewhere. So it's costing even more, and it's taking way more time because people are finding a lot of new ways to game the system. We can see a lot of evidence of this as well, and it was pretty obvious to everyone at the time that there are these political patronage networks. Nowadays, I think it's more respectable, not saying that political patronage happens at all in modern days, but theoretically, might be more respectable to just kind of be like, oh yeah, makes sense. I mean, actually, no, we still see it today. I mean, when there's a new administration in Washington, the opposing political party, where they can be purged, typically is, right? In a lot of cases. Though sometimes you've got people who are good enough at their job and aren't like that big of partisans, they stick around. That still happens at the time. And people just kind of viewed it as the thing that would happen. Here's an excellent example from right here in this building. And we still have physical traces of it as well. And that is the hiring of canal clerk John J. Brentnall, whose name is currently carved into the way chamber right below me. In the newspaper article about his hiring, evidently it was a Republican newspaper, they wrote that they have nothing bad to say about any of the new appointees to the Waylock building, except they are, quote, all Orthodox Democrats, parentheses, firm believers in everything the Democratic Party has done or will ever do, end quote. So you can see. People know why you're getting hired for these jobs. I mean, the Waylock, it's really not that complicated how it worked, right? You just had to be able to do basic kind of math. So we see a lot of newspaper editors get appointments here because, you know, they're writing good editorials for whoever got elected, right? So they now earn favor, right? And there are occasionally investigations into improper use of the patronage network and general corruption. However, none of them are ever particularly effective, and most often they are used specifically to target your political enemies. We have, during the building of the canal, Myron Holly, one of the treasurers, found that $30,000 has gone missing from the overall fund to build the canals that he probably took to buy some land. $30,000 is going to look like a rounding error in some of the things we're going to talk about later in the canal's history. In the 1840s, there's a pretty big investigation. A canal commissioner will end up impeached, etc. But I think an important thing we should talk about is why do patronage politics exist? It's not just people sitting in, smoke-filled rooms, twirling their mustaches, easily saying, "Oh yes, power. That's all I want." I mean, there is a bit of that as well. This is the literal era of smoke-filled rooms. Why are people going along with this system and electing people? I read an interesting book recently by a Tammany Hall district captain who was kind of explaining kind of an inside look at how machine politics worked. And a lot of times you're not even explicitly telling people like, "Hey, you should vote for me." Sometimes in political patronage, at least the justification is fairly altruistic. You've got people who need jobs, who need to put food on the table for their families, for themselves. You have jobs to give away. And those people, you're not even asking them necessarily for their vote. It's just kind of implied because, you just gave this person a job. Why wouldn't they vote for you through your political office? That sort of thing happens. But also, there are the people who just want to kind of make money, benefit themselves, stay in power. They think they can run government better. The best way they think they can stay in power is and do the good things that they hope to do, right? Is to provide for people with a job. And we understand where these people who are doing the voting, who are getting patronized, are coming from, right? We all have to eat. We all need jobs. There are slim pickings at times in America. This is how it kind of just becomes this perpetually feeding thing. Though, of course, political leaders will enrich themselves. A famous example of this is a quote from the leader of, and you can see just how ubiquitous it is, politics. Quote from the late 1800s from the boss of Tammany Hall in New York City, Richard Croker. He was under investigation from prosecutor Frank Moss, who asked if he was working for, quote, his own pocket as opposed to the public interest. To which Richard Croker simply said, "All the time, same as you." And that was his response. I'm enriching myself. So are you. We're all after the same thing here, more or less. So in the ensuing decades, things build and build. I mean, it starts to get really out of hand, especially after the Civil War. You've got people just spending tons and tons of money, getting kickbacks. This is the era of Boss Tweed down in New York City, this particularly infamous era of corruption. And things really come to a head with the Canal Ring in 1874. That is when the man depicted here is elected governor of New York State. This is Democrat Samuel J. Tilden. Tilden had become he'd been a railroad lawyer for a good amount of his life, but heavily involved in Democratic politics. He becomes particularly famous as a reformer within the Democratic Party. He leads the charge against Tweed and Tammany Hall, eventually getting Tweed and a few others in that ring sent to jail, and he leverages that to get elected governor of New York. That is when he sets his sight on the rest of the state outside of New York City. And he goes after what is called the Canal Ring. This is a great political cartoon of Governor Tilden pressing the Canal ring. When he's elected governor, he gives a speech, his first kind of speech as governor, that he's going to clean up the state and sets up a canal investigating commission, which will investigate 41 sites on the Erie Canal, 9 on the Champlain, 4 on the Shenango, and 1 on the Genesee Valley Canal to see, if things are, on the level, if you will, on those sites. The next year, 1875, they will come back. Canal rings, fascinating. I won't get too into it, but they do reveal a lot of shady dealing going on, based right out of here in Syracuse, especially involving canal contractors, so the people whose jobs are to build and repair sections of the canal. In this town are based 2 of the largest contractors on the canal, Henry Dennison, who is a Democrat, and James J. Belden, who is a Republican. Accounts say that, this bipartisanship in canal contracting really helped them, because no matter who was in power in Albany, they could always count on getting canal contracts. And I find it pretty interesting. They also do kind of, Abbott and Costello like routine, if you will. Henry Dennison, Democrat, he is kind of a bon vivant. He hosts all these big parties at his mansion here in Syracuse, and hobnobs with everyone. While Belden, he's this more stolid, grumpy guy, very pious from what we understand. He's the type of guy who, when you get to Henry Dennison's party, he's the one who brings you into the back room, the study that's full of cigar smoke and whatnot. You hash out, how you're going to fleece the state for hundreds of thousands of dollars, allegedly, right? Belden is never convicted of anything. 1875, this report shows that there have been a number of pretty shifty bidding practices. Canal contractors would put in low bids, these politically connected contractors put in low bids, where they, estimate how much of certain materials that they were going to need to use. They would intentionally have certain materials. They'd assign pretty high prices to, but say, oh, we don't need to use that much of like this sort of stone. Well, then as soon as they get the contract, literally the report finds that Henry Dennison, the second he is issued a contract, immediately changes the specs of his bid to say that the stones that he had so high priced, he actually now needs to build pretty much the whole section out of these stones, so he can make way more money. And these bids are a lot higher than what other contractors have been given. So he's skimming a lot of that off the top is what is implied. Also, the work is pretty poorly done. There are specifications that are not lived up to, and we'll see an example of that in a second. Like I said, once bids are let out, contractors change the scope of their work dramatically in ways that make them a lot more money. And New York State engineers sign off on like all of those. There's a lot of discretion within the canal office of kind of, if something goes wrong, you have permission to spend some extra money. And they give that inch, and these contractors and engineers that they're working with take a mile. Put in charge of this investigation is the state's Attorney General, Charles S. Fairchild. Anyone recognize that name? All right. Well, he is actually, we might know him here in central New York. Lorenzo State Historic Site is his house, so it is his wife's property. He will eventually, he's the prosecutor. This is where he makes his name. He will eventually become Secretary of the Treasury for another gentleman who spent a good amount of his life here in central New York, Grover Cleveland. He's his Secretary of the Treasury. So this kind of makes his career. Let's look at some of the results. of this investigation? Well, Henry Dennison, he is found to actually be doing, illegal, corrupt things, getting kickbacks. They can prove that. He gets jailed for 6 months for taking probably around $500,000 to $1 million, it appears, from that report from the state. James J. Belden, meanwhile, does not get charged with anything. In fact, he leverages being charged with corruption, saying, oh my God, look at me, I'm being attacked. He gets elected in 1877, mayor of Syracuse. Then he will be elected to Congress multiple times out of Syracuse. He actually becomes kind of one of the most important Republicans in Syracuse. And he also founds a little newspaper called the Syracuse Post. That's the Post and the Post Standard, in case you know. Meanwhile, Tilden, here he is. He's this reformer. He's fighting the Canal. And this is before everyone realizes all these investigations are going to come to pretty much nothing. A slap on the wrist, a few months in jail. For Belden, he will be nominated in 1876 for president on the Democratic ticket, run against Rutherford B. Hayes. This is one of the most controversial and consequential elections in American history. Tilden will win the popular vote. However, in some shady bathroom dealing in Washington, there are 4 states whose electors are contested. He will lose. All of the electors will be awarded to Hayes, who takes over in this deal that says Hayes can become president. In exchange, Reconstruction is ended, a major goal of the Democratic Party at this time. And talking about the results of the end of Reconstruction is an entire talk in itself I won't get into here. But you can see pretty major results. Then what happens in the Canal office? People realize these Canal commissioners, that whole thing, not working out. So a new position is created, one that will theoretically be isolated from all of these political demands. That is the superintendent of public works, will now oversee the Canal Commission. I haven't been rambling too. Boy, I have been rambling a while. All right, yeah, so Fairchild, we talked about, he's initially nominated, but he's rejected by the state Senate. And instead, a guy some of you may be familiar with, former Civil War General George B. McClellan is appointed the first superintendent of public works. So there we have it. That's where George Washington Aldridge, that's his position in 1895 and how it got there. Now let's look at what happens. Here's a great diagram showing from that 1875 investigation. Over here on the left is what a canal wall was supposed to look like in cross-section. When the canal investigators went over to look at it, you've got these big, solid, minimum of 3 foot wide stones forming the wall. What the contractors actually make is they just toss in whatever building materials essentially they can, probably for whatever the lowest price was, and you get this horrible wall. The report says we're probably going to have to pull all of this stuff out again in a few years. It's that badly constructed. So this is what's going on in the state. All right, so now let's look at Aldridge's time as superintendent of public works. So for a while, the first kind of 70 years, 50-ish years of the canal's history, it's always growing, seeing more and more shipping on it. Starting in the 1840s, we start seeing what's on your screen here. Railroads start moving in, but for a while, they are both growing simultaneously, all the way into the Civil War. It's not until mid-1860s there's more rail traffic in New York than canal traffic. And in fact, the canals will peak for traffic in the mid-1870s. However, after the mid-1870s, canal traffic starts decreasing. And the canal keeps trying to remain competitive. In 1883, this building loses its function when canal tolls are abolished, again, trying to make it cheaper to move freight on the New York State canal system. But that's still not enough. And we see canalers start innovating, try to carry more stuff on their canal boats to compete with these railroads. That's when you see this innovation come into being on the canal. This is everyone's favorite canal term, a poodle dasher. Ooh, yeah, all right. Which is just, two canal boats lashed together. But you can carry twice as much stuff, right? Because you got two canal boats. And, one of them doesn't have to have a mule stable in front. So you can carry all that junk in there too. By junk, I mean freight. But that's, still, I mean, that's good, but that's only an extra like 250-ish tons of freight. Railroads just keep getting bigger. Steam locomotives become more and more efficient. They can carry more stuff. And things come to a head in 1894. That is when we have a new constitutional convention. And it is approved that in that constitution, the state engineer is told to examine deepening the canal to 9 feet deep. Will hopefully allow these boats to get even bigger. And also to better accommodate these poodle dashers, larger boats. The amendment passes the people of the state. So state engineer Campbell W. Adams is put in charge of making this estimate. However, he's just told, figure it out. He is given surveys from 1876, and he is only allotted 12 days to come up with an estimate of how much it's going to cost the state to build this thing to 9 feet deep across the whole system. He comes up with a figure of $11,573,000. All right, you got the gist of that. I said that a little weird. But anyway, with an additional $1 million needed to repair and rebuild walls. The next year, 1895, the state legislature looks at that number and says, well, we'll give you $9 million. We can presumably give you $2 million more when you need it. So they approve $9 million. That's where what's called the $9 million improvement it's made. And they tell Adams and Aldridge, who is now in charge, right? It's 1895, to get the work within 3 months. However, the first thing they do is Campbell W. Adams in January of 1896, he gets to work. But he has his teams go out and draw up new, more modern, accurate surveys. Those people promptly come back and say, wow, those 20-year-old surveys you were working with, shockingly, weren't accurate still. And instead, they estimate between $13.5 to $16 million are going to be needed to build this canal. So, pretty much double what the state suggested. They see this and they say, okay, well, let's do the important things with the $9 million improvement. And that means doubling locks, so making them twice as long so poodle dashers can go through. And in places like Syracuse, Rochester, kind of places where it's super necessary to have deeper canals, let's deepen the canal there. Hopefully the work proceeds well enough that the state will authorize another $9 million-ish for us. However, by 1897, it's becoming pretty apparent that they don't have enough money, and the work that is being done is not really sufficient to justify more investment from the state. It's just not really getting done. Things seem to be quite inefficient in the building of this canal. In 1895, an investigating committee is formed in the legislature to figure out what's been happening with the canal. Why are they already out of money after 2 years? George Washington Aldridge's obituary even says he grossly mismanaged the canal during this time period, and money just flowed through his fingers. So let's look at what they found in this investigation. Hat tip to Elizabeth over there. She read this mostly for me. So it was delivered in 1899 to New York State and its new reformist governor, a man by the name of Theodore Roosevelt. Maybe you've heard of him. And they look into specifically whether criminal proceedings should take place against this man, state engineer Campbell W. Adams, and George W. Aldridge. At this point, Aldridge has been fully removed from Department of Public Works because, you know, his big project hasn't really worked out. The main question, yeah, should they be charged? They find 4 major areas of discrepancy. There are differences in the original survey and the work that was actually done. There are differences between the definition of hard pan, which type of soil, and rock. Embankment prices added after work. There are these new embankment prices added after the work is let out. It's really increasing prices on canal work. And this last one here. There seem to be special agreements permitting increases in payment to contractors that are complete changes in the plan. However, that investigating comes back, says they are lacking evidence of felony, but there is the possibility, maybe charged Adams at least, on a misdemeanor for neglect of duty. However, they have one major caveat. They don't think that there is sufficient evidence of bad faith or corrupt motives because you need proof that, quote, fraudulent collusion allowed charging of a misdemeanor based on willful neglect of duty. Anyone employed by the state who makes knowingly faulty estimates can be charged with a misdemeanor. And quote, essentially, what they say is you need proof, right, that a person intentionally, knowingly made wrong estimates. And they say we don't have proof that Campbell Adams isn't just bad at his job. So yeah, they kind of let it stand there, more or less. Also, they note that there's a 2-limit statute of limitations on corruption cases and fraud cases in New York State at the time. You'll note the date, 1899. These alleged crimes happened in 1896, 1897. So the statute of limitations is over too. So they pretty much say there's really not much we can do here. But they do find a number of discrepancies throughout, including, you know, payments of hauling dirt much farther than it was supposed to be. In fact, there was a whole clause in all contracts that said you can't haul dirt farther away than 1,000 feet from where you're excavating, or else it's all you have to pay for any extra moving you do. It's called an overhaul charge. Pretty much every engineer just signs off a waiver on that, says, no, we'll pay you for that. Again, we see there's all this leeway that's given to the state engineer, the engineers below him, and the superintendent of public works. So, do they learn any lessons here? Well, the conclusion of the report is that the powers of the state engineer and superintendent of public works should be greatly restricted when it involves large expenditures. They'll take some efforts to do that over the next few years. Also, it should forbid the state engineer or state officer from making allowances for items not included in the contract or payment not permitted in the contract except for necessary work. And they recommend more closely guarding the extra work provisioning that allows these special agreements. So, yeah, I mean, the investigation says, like, hey, we need to change stuff up, but we can't really do anything about what's already happening. So what happens to these guys? Adams, he kind of goes into exile, it seems like, to Europe, but he's fine there. He's a prominent civil engineer. Aldridge, like I said, loses his position as superintendent, but he's still a powerful guy. 1902, he's appointed secretary of the State Railway Commission until 1907. Then he runs for Congress in 1910, loses badly to kind of a nobody, but don't worry about him. He ends up part of the Big Three, or the kitchen cabinet of Governor Charles Whitman, along with fellow Republican Party bosses Thomas Pratt of New York City and Francis Hendricks of Syracuse. I know we've got a few SU alums in here, probably familiar with Hendricks Chapel. Yes, that's where that gets its name. In 1820, he is a major partisan for Warren G. Harding, one of two members of the New York State delegation who votes for Harding every single time, even though he's not supposed to. And gets Harding nominated for president, and he gets the ultimate patronage job, always throughout history, which is collector of the Port of New York, which people make just massive amounts of money on that one. However, he doesn't really get to enjoy that position too long. He dies in the position. So that's the story of George Washington Aldridge. However, there's one other small kind of side quest, if you will, on this painting, and that is who painted it. We have a signature, Claris. Is believed to be Dr. John T. Claris, born in London, Ontario in 1856. He moves to Buffalo at an early age. This is a fun Canal story. And attends Toronto Veterinary College, where he graduated with a degree as a veterinary surgeon in 1882, the age of 20. Moves back to his home of Buffalo, where he opens the Buffalo East Side Horse Infirmary on Clinton Street. Top state-of-the-art horse hospital. Probably servicing plenty of horses and mules traveling along the Erie Canal. It's so successful that 2 years later, he opens an even bigger horse hospital, just down the street on Clinton Street, of 16 box stalls and 20 open stalls. Probably means something for horse people. Also on the second floor, there's doctor offices. He has a museum of comparative anatomy. It's quite an interesting list of animal skeletons he has upstairs. Normal thing to have in your horse hospital. And surgical suites and treatment facilities. He's apparently doing surgery on horses. I mean, I am aware of the usual way you treat horse injuries, which don't require surgery. But anyway, he also, on the third floor, they produce horse medicine. Here we see, an advertisement, which seems to have probably, if we look at the other horses, you can see why those horses are so well made. Dr. John T. Claris loves him a good horse painting. He has a big carriage that's famous around Buffalo. That's incredibly gaudy and painted. Claris, based on this, if he painted these horses, we're pretty confident. I mean, fairly similar style in all these advertisements for Dr. Claris veterinary medicine. There we go. That sounds better than horse medicine, right? Actually, that 1884 building is still too small. He develops a full-blown horse veterinarian empire. By 1896, he's expanded the facility to 30 more stalls. It's estimated that in Buffalo, they're treating what I enjoyed. It says 2,000 patients a year were admitted to the main veterinary hospital in Buffalo, but they also expand. They have a branch near the Buffalo stockyards, and he even has, by 1913, his own veterinary hospitals in Jersey City, Cleveland, and Bedford, Massachusetts, as well as Buffalo. So we've got this giant horse healing empire. And again, probably a lot of Canal horses and mules will be serviced by Dr. Claris. But why is he painting the boss of the Buffalo Republican Party. Well, that's because, as is often the case, you want to create a business empire, you need to usually have some friends in high places, or at least you make them. He will become very notable in E-Gains. He's part of this patronage network. He is appointed shortly after he arrives in Buffalo, the federal inspector for the Port of Buffalo, which he holds for 8 years. And then, a staunch Republican, he will be appointed to be the chief inspector for Western New York for the Bureau of Animal Industry. A little bit of regulatory capture here as well. Let's see. There's something else. Oh, he is also, for the next 30 years, also on the state Republican committee, where he no doubt runs into fellow notable Western New York Republican George W. Aldridge. And, he's a good artist, so presumably it seems like Aldridge said, hey, paint my picture leading the canal boat, as we see over there. There's only one mystery left from this painting. I know there's probably other mysteries too, and that is where this boat gets its name from. Who is James Welch? I don't know. I can't find anything. So if anyone knows who James Welch is, please tell me. So that's my story. Look at that. I only went 8 minutes over. I know. I lose hours of sleep saying who is Jimmy Welch here. Let's see. We got any questions on Zoom or in the audience? Sorry, Linda and Harold Clark. They just asked. Yes, Dave.
It was great. Thank you.
Thanks.
So comprehensive. So do you think he has any other motive besides painting this painting?
It's a good question. The question for people on Zoom, did he have any motive other than, he was friends with Aldridge for painting it? I don't fully know. I mean, I'm sure, here's Belvin in a good position. Maybe you give him a free painting and, gain some friends, influence people, but I don't know for sure. Yes. That Claris has, I am unfamiliar. Look for them. You can only find really the advertisements on this horse medicine. Yeah. Yeah.
Physically, what phase of the canal is mentioned?
This is the 70-foot wide, 7-foot deep enlarged canal. They're trying to make it bigger in the 1890s, the 90 GP. Yeah. Yes.
What is the symbolism of the?
That I'm not 100% sure if there is symbolism in that, or just they were like telegraph pole laying next to the canal. It's a good question though. Any other question? Steph, I know you're our resident art historian. Hope my analysis was good.
I was curious, how the museum was part of it.
Looked into it. We bought it from someone in, I believe, the early 2000s. If I remember the accession documentation correctly. For people on Zoom, the question was, how did we acquire the painting? Not sure. Yes.
I would you guess that if he was a veterinarian, horses would be treating the mules too?
Yes, I assume in addition to horses, he was doing mules. I mean, by the time this huge veterinary empire, it seems like, by the end of his career, I'm sure he's treating anything with 4 legs. Or maybe anything with hooves at least. Yes.
Veterinary fire. Why are you interested in being the inspector for money, or is it just
That I don't fully know. So people on Zoom, the question was, why, if you are this important veterinarian, excuse me.
Hi there.
Oh,
Your
hello.
folder is fat today.
Oh, I didn't think there'd be very much to do today.
No, there's not much. Well, there's not a ton to do, but it has the 2 weeks of deposits from that you've already put in.
Oh, that's what we see.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the question was, why would you want to be a veterinarian? If you were a veterinarian, why also want to hold these political positions? When he is federal inspector, he is a young veterinarian at the time. He's appointed only 2 years after he gets back from Buffalo to this position. And like I kind of implied with Aldridge when he becomes collector of the Port of New York, these harborside jobs especially, they're very lucrative. Money tends to, you know, fall off the side of ships, kind of, a lot of times. Again, you can get that patronage. And what we were kind of talking about before, like why the patronage network continues, you know, people have their political opinions, even if you're a veterinarian and you think you can do it better. I mean, where we're from, Chittenango, our state assemblyman, Jack McCann, he was a veterinarian. Those are very different things, right? He might have been a veteran, so I think he was. Yeah. So kind of, yeah, he wants to, you know, do what's best for Buffalo in his opinion. Any other questions? And make a lot of money. No. Well, you've been a great audience. Hopefully, I didn't bore you too much with, you know, kind of contracts and stuff. But, all right. Oh, there is. What is the origin of Poodle Dasher? It's Poodle Dasher with an H. And I don't know where Poodle Dasher comes from. It's just seemingly one of these kind of Canal terms that originated. Maybe some other Canalers might know, but I have not seen an etymology on Poodle Dasher. I assume the Dasher bit because they were dashed or lashed together, but where Hoodle comes from, got me there. Anything else? Oh, well, yes. I forgot there was one other event I did not mention. August 2nd. If you enjoyed my talk, but want one that's more exciting. On August 2nd at 6:30. So from 5 to 8, we are having a happy hour here at the museum. And Carrie Eaton, who's been working here for how long has it been? Yeah, six months. But she's working on a master's as well into single Irish immigrant working class women in Syracuse. She's going to be doing a presentation and unveiling a new exhibit on that research. That should be pretty fun. So I encourage you, come on down here August 2nd as well. Drinks and food and history. Yeah. What more can you ask? Yeah. And we'll have music too out in the gardens. Yes. All right. Thank you.